Pro 2 courses this year. So what I'm going to attempt to do next few minutes is kind of explain how this all comes together, how it might apply to you, and maybe something that you can walk away with. There's some details here that you'll walk away and go, what did that picture mean, or what was he intending there? Please ask questions as we go along. At the end, I have my email address there. I can send you notes on some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So please feel free to ask questions. But the basic gist of this is addressing human factors and how they influence our decision making. And these two folks were at the forefront when I started learning about avalanches back in the dark ages. Late 80s, early 90s, they had published the book Snow Sense. And running the Alaska Avalanche School, they put out all these different human factors, these different biases, these different problems that we basically skew our decisions. We can be very rational decision makers, but then it all gets kind of thrown into the toilet when we're tired or hungry or facing a really beautiful powder slope. And they were the first ones to really put it out there. Other people, Dale Atkins, did a lot, but kind of the seminal work that we all refer to and talk about was put out there by Ian McCammon in the heuristic traps. And how many of you are familiar with FACETS or heuristic traps? Go ahead and raise your hands. Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir. Good, that'll make the talk shorter. I had the good fortune of working with Ian and with Scotty on the initial AvPro courses. And I learned a ton from him. So quick recap of the FACETS or the heuristic traps, these simple rule-based decisions that we get into. Familiarity, okay? This is as we gain experience, we return to places and we start seeing patterns and we start recognizing what happens in this terrain. The avalanches start here, especially as patrollers. This is where I put my shot to get this result. And that's great. It works most of the time, and it shortcuts our decision making. It makes us more efficient. We have to have this. It's not a bad thing. The problem is when we're not recognizing all the other things that are changing and what variables are inconsistent with the previous patterns, and that's when it becomes a trap. Acceptance, in the nature of his study, he looked at looking for acceptance from the opposite gender, basically men showing off for the ladies, if you will. But there's a much broader category to this, and it has changed with the advent of social media. If you're curious about that, start looking up work by Jerry Isaac and how that has changed with Facebook and Instagram. Commitment towards a goal, okay? We're all goal-driven people, okay? We want to get the area open. We want to provide a good experience for our clients. We want to get to the top. Expert halo, we'll talk about this quite a bit more, but basically, hey, Scott knows way more about this terrain than I do. I was deferring to him on route finding decisions in the past few days. Tracks. This catches a lot of people up as far as what is tracks and what is social consensus. Tracks is a forced word for scarcity. It's to make the acronym work, right? But it's basically saying, hey, there's everything's skied out except this slope. Let's go get it before someone else does. That's scarcity heuristic. Social consensus is, hey, there are tracks there, it must be safe. Okay, I feel good about it. Other people are doing it. It must be a wise decision. Okay, so those, the FACETS, the heuristic traps are pretty well addressed on recreational avalanche courses. And as part of the pro training, it's required reading coming into the course, at least on the courses that we've run. You need to be familiar with this research. Okay, So that's good. And what Ian has come in on some of the old level 3 courses that we ran and said, all well and good, and these people are more susceptible to these heuristic traps, but what about you? What is your, what ails you? What is a common thread? Look at your avalanche accidents, your incidents, your near misses. What are the common features? And using these facets, what are these personal disaster flags? Okay. So, great concept. I've applied it to far too many of my near misses, and I definitely know what I'm susceptible to more commonly. But let's take it a step further. And this is where Ken Wiley comes in. Ken Wiley was he was the tail guide in a very bad avalanche accident. 13 people were caught, 7 people died in Canada in 2006, I believe. And that had a huge impact on him. And some may say that he's been doing penance ever since. He wrote the book Buried as an explanation of his kind of journey into depression and out of it, and what he's done subsequently as a guide and an outdoor educator. He came to this Exum guide training and basically ran a full day of training for the staff at Exum and also for AAI. And some of it, resonated and hit really well. Some of it not as much. But he had one part that really hit, and that was his 7 avalanche dragons. These 7 common themes or 7 spectrums, if you will, of human character. And some of them kind of dovetail with heuristic traps, but some of them don't. And some of them seem really dark. And how do you pull a positive out of it? How do you have a spectrum between good and evil? So let's look at these, and this is the part where you get to tell me what is the good side of arrogance. What is a positive side of an arrogant quality?
You might know your competencies.
Yeah, competency or confidence. Yeah, you portray a confident attitude. Okay, that's important when you're leading others. Okay, what if it goes too far? You may resist feedback. Okay, it's definitely a spectrum between a positive trait and a negative trait. Okay, what about self-deprecation? Positive side of it.
You're humble.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of us fear going out with route leaders or lead guides who say, I've seen it all and this is exactly what's going to happen. We appreciate people who can say, well, I think this might happen. Here are some of the potential reasons it won't. I've been fooled before. Humility is a huge thing in the avalanche profession, and it tends to lead us to believe those people more than the people who say, it always is this way or it never is that way. Okay? What about the far side of it, or the negative side of self-deprecation?
Second-guessing your decision-making.
Yeah. You may second guess your own decisions. You may lack a voice. It's like, I really don't understand this. I've been in 14 years. I've been a route leader here for 8, but I don't really know what's going on. You probably do. So it can be taken too far. Part of Ken's talk was, I felt as the assistant guide with this larger-than-life lead guide that my input was not wanted and it wasn't valuable. And he didn't speak up, and he's been living with the consequences ever since. Impatience. What's a positive side of impatience? Focused, efficient, targeted. Yeah. What about the negative side? Impulsive. Yep. Tunnel vision. Cutting corners. Yeah. That race did not go well. Okay. How about martyrdom? These are pretty big topics, huh? They're like, holy, what's a positive on martyrdom?
More willing to accept responsibility.
Yeah. Yep. Hard worker. Maybe a person who chooses the worst jobs first and gets them done. But taken too far, what does it look like? For me, it looked like this. But basically, if you're always taking all the jobs, you're taking away responsibilities and learning opportunities for other people. You're basically taking away empowerment of people. It also will toast you, and you may end up being resentful. So martyrdom, there is that spectrum. Hey, it's great to get things done. It's, Joe Schmo's School of Bombs, his first motto is, pick the worst jobs and do it first. Okay, help out. What about greed? In this industry, what does it look like? On the positive side, it may be passion and desire to get good snow, to get out there, breaking trail. What about the negative side?
Higher ratios, cutting corners.
Yep.
Efficiency over.
Yep. Who are you prioritizing? Yeah, there's lots of manifestations, but who are you prioritizing? It's all about me. Enough about me. What do you think about me? Okay. That's an Aaron McGovern quote. Self-destruction. There's a number of ways we see this, and this was a little bit of a far-fetched one for me initially. But there's a culture within guides and certainly within ski patrols of pretty hard drinking, right? But there's other approaches to this. Basically, the far end of it may be a powder junkie or someone always wanting to find kind of the edge of risk, the edge of the envelope, where, hey, where can I make an avalanche? Okay, where do I go to find this? And always pushing the edge to get closer to that. One really good question to ask yourself in this category is, how do you react to a near miss? Do you think, holy cow, that was close. I have a lot to learn. Or there's the line, I found it. And that's a good feeling, like there's the edge. I want to be there again. I have been that person. I wanted to go out and make avalanches as often as I could. And not being a patroller at the time, that was real dangerous. Okay, so your reaction to adrenaline-inducing events or to risk mitigation can be put in these terms. Okay, and finally, stubbornness. Positive. Perseverance or tenacity. Great. Okay. What about the downside of it? Mentioned it just before, tunnel vision. Okay, so now we have 6 heuristic traps, 7 avalanche dragons. These are the heuristic traps for the Pro 2 students. are required reading coming into the course, and hopefully they've been addressed during some of their recreational training. The 7 Avalanche Dragons this year was presented during the course of the course. Also required reading for the course was a paper by Scotty and Ron Simonhois on near misses at ski areas and contributory factors there. So we've front-loaded these Pro 2 courses with a whole bunch of basically things that can ail you. At the end of the course, if you're coming to take a course in the future from us, here's basically one of the test questions, because it's going to stay there, is what's your major malfunction? What are 5 of your personal disaster flags? Okay. It's a hard one to knock points off for because you don't know what drives people. But not only what are your personal disaster flags, but what are the solutions to them? What are you going to do to change it? Okay. So we had 55 Pro 2 students this year take this written final, if you will. And the results were 25 of the professionals were patrollers, varying experience from route leaders to snow safety techs to snow safety program directors. We had guides, again, we had alpine guides who were not active ski guides. We had apprentice guides, but predominantly guides and lead guides. And that was, I believe, 23. And then we had a number of outdoor educators. We had a few Avalanche Center observers, and we had 1 Avalanche Center forecaster. So they made up 7 of the remaining folks. So this was not the intent when we wrote this test, but after I talked to Scotty, I was like, holy cow, I actually have captured a snapshot of people moving into leadership roles in the avalanche profession. And where are they at? What scares them about themselves? So here's the breakdown. I kind of glommed together educators, observers, and forecasters into one group just by the nature of the few numbers involved. So number 1 problem, both for patrollers and guides, I lumped expert, halo, and arrogance together. And the reason I did that was it's surrounding a communication issue as far as someone's perceived knowledge. And the expert halo is, holy cow, I'm with this icon or very knowledgeable person who really knows their stuff. And maybe I should just shut up and listen. Whereas arrogance is, hey, I'm this person who's training all these people, and how much do I pass on? How much do I allow how much leash do I give them? Okay. That's, there are different perspectives on the same thing, a perception of leadership and knowledge. So I've glommed them together. Because of that, they rose to the top for both patrollers and guides. Taken separately, they were in the top 2 to 3. Okay. Acceptance for educators and observers, we'll come back to that. Number 2, familiarity. We have to be familiar with our terrain as guides and patrollers. It is a requirement. It is, it's very important. The problem is when you've thrown that shot 40 times in the same place and gotten results when it's unstable and it's always been there, and then conditions change, it's a big trap. Patrollers recognize this, guides recognize this, but for number 2, for a very small data set, commitment was what they cited. Number 3, acceptance. Reading through the responses for the patrollers, their acceptance was their acceptance from their peers, from their other teams on the mountain, from their route partners, that they do it right the first pass, that they get the mountain open on time. It's very much a self-imposed pressure. Commitment for guides, commitment to provide an experience. I would have thought acceptance would have been higher here, but it was not for guides. And then familiarity for educators. Fourth one down, distractions. I lumped a whole bunch of distractions together. I'll talk about that in a minute. Impatience for guides. At least with patrollers, we're working with people who can ski, right? For the most part. Guides, you may be working with someone who can barely hanging on out there, both in the conditions or the ski ability. And then I'm not going to dive too far into the 3 through 5 for the educators because there are such kind of small results. They were scattered through a whole bunch of different factors. And then the last one, patrollers, and Scotty explained this to me pretty well. This greed, this desire for powder, because you've just spent days not skiing fall line, doing Z's all over the mountain, moving tower pads, moving ropes, bamboo, and you have not got your fill. So greed was, or mad pow disease as they put it, was a big factor for a lot of folks. Distractions falls in for guides, and then self-deprecation. I don't know what that means. So let's break it down a little bit. This expert at Halo in Arrogance, it was clearly a break for expert Halo, people moving into the profession, not that much experience. Arrogance, the people who are training others have more experience. And that followed pretty clearly. And that isn't reflected just occupationally. It's more of a mileage factor. Acceptance makes sense for patrollers. That's a self-imposed pressure of, hey, let's get it open, let's get it done, let's do it right. Why it wasn't there for guides, I know as a guide, I've felt a lot of pressure to provide the best possible powder steep skiing experience as possible for my guests. But for whatever reason, it didn't stand out in this data set. I don't know why it's number one for this very small data group, the educators, observers. If anyone has an idea of this, please let me know. But I feel it's, I worry that it's a function of a very small group. But if you can explain it, please do. Distractions. There's a myriad of distractions out there. This was the classification tree from Scotty's work with Ron Simonhois, where distractions included, let's see if I can get this to work, the environment, too cold, too windy, pressure, and all kinds of different pressures, 4 different pressures. Pre-route events, how the morning's setting up, going out, and then event-related distractions. Add to that some of the distractions that our students brought out, and it included injuries, nagging injuries, and PTSD. One student talked about just dealing with bad medical trauma on the job, took his focus away. So a couple other distractions there. Basically, all these different distractions, including supervisory pressure and self-inflicted pressure, fell into these, or supervisory and management pressure fell into what the category I called distractions. And then the last one, I talked about this greed or mad pow disease for patrollers who just don't get enough powder. So sad. Okay. Impatience for guides also address that. I think that's just dealing with a very low bar for some clients. There's certainly clients that are much better skiers than I am, but you deal with the whole spectrum. And then again, these seem like too small numbers to put any great weight to. So what? It's not about these huge trends or amazing conclusions that I've came up with in the 3 days that I've looked at this data. It's more about what influences you. Because it didn't show up in the top 5 for your profession, it doesn't mean that it's not your major Achilles heel. So when you look through your near misses, when you look through your accidents, look for the trends. What's the commonality between these different events? It may include something that wasn't even mentioned, which I think is a pretty important one, which is fatigue. Look for those factors. And then don't stop. What can you do about them? So these solutions are super important. And I'm going to offer you some solutions to my problems. They certainly may be useful to you, but for me, here's what I've learned going through this process. Don't absorb other people's stress. It is amazing heli skiing with people who pay thousands of dollars a day to go out and ski what they've been dreaming about for maybe several years. It is, people are amped and they are not patient. That's fine. Let that go. Your problem is dealing with the conditions in the field. You'll do your best. That's what we do. Don't absorb their stress. Choose your partners wisely. It's something we say in our level 1 courses or level 2 courses. What does that mean? It means on high hazard days, on high consequence days, choose someone who has different PDFs than you. Okay? If I'm commitment driven, Scotty's commitment driven, Eric's commitment driven, it's probably not the best team to go out in high hazard on a high consequence tour. Might be a great team to go on a hut trip with low expectations. But think about, do your partners accentuate your own faults? If anyone's seen the Gordon Graham video on high-risk, low-frequency situations, you'll remember this quote: slow down, slow down, slow down. That's a big part of not absorbing other people's stress. It's not what your compadres want to hear when you want to get the mountain to open on time. It's definitely not what the clients want to hear when it's the first flyable window in 4 days. But take a breath and then proceed. That pause step, that breath, has saved me more than I can count. It's huge. Get more sleep. It is hard when you're just in a cycle, avalanche day after avalanche day, forecast day after forecast day. But put it all aside. It's like, well, what can go out the window here? Well, the visit to the bar probably is not going to help me. The worrying about the project 4 weeks down the line, that's okay. Get some sleep. Care less. This was a huge step for me. I had to reinvent the wheel, create a new presentation every time I taught. I had to give them 100% of what I knew. I realized that if I could give most of what I thought was the most important, that would probably be a better takeaway. Okay? Lower the bar. Don't outsmart the avalanche problem. I love hanging out with people and talking about avalanche mechanics, but boy, can you outthink the problems. It's collapsing out there. There are natural avalanches within the last day or 2 days. Sounds pretty simple. Define what can go wrong. Ron Simonhoist did a great talk in Bozeman last week, and he was talking about the historic cycle in Colorado, R5s everywhere, new avalanche paths being created. Oh yeah, Chevy avalanche buried by an avalanche. It was awesome. It was really cool. And he said that each night before he went to bed, he thought about what was going to go wrong the next day. There's going to be helicopter bombing missions. There's going to be plenty of avalanche rounds. There's going to be closures. That's part of the plan. What's going to go wrong with the plan? Think about that. Do the pre-mortem test beforehand. And then this was what stood out for me. It's from Brian Gorsuch. Some of you may know him from forecasting on the Stanley Lohmann highway. Don't have to be right, just can't be wrong. It's like you can try and figure all this shit out, and it's really fun, and it's probably really important. But bottom line is, don't get yourself caught, don't get other people caught, okay? Just based on your perception of the problem. So thank you to all the students, to Pat, who took one of these courses, for this information, and my coworkers. And then thank you to Scotty and crew for inviting me and letting me ramble for this period. My address on the bottom, if you want notes on the avalanche dragons or anything else. Thanks.